And this is where we began last week, John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Notice it's not it was in the beginning with God, it's he was in the beginning with God. John identifying the Logos, identifying the Word as not something written on a piece of paper, but as a he, as an entity that is going to take on flesh. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him. Without him, nothing was made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. And the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. So notice that John lays out the creation motif we talked about last week, the creation motif we talked about the week before. John's recreating a new reality. It's through a man named Jesus. But John does something odd. I think that fourth verse, things are backward in John's creation reality. Because how does God create in the book of Genesis? Genesis, God creates the heavens and the earth. He speaks light into darkness, and then he starts bringing things to life, right? There's light, and then talk to the ground, make an animal. Talk to the water, make a fish. Talk to the sky, make a bird. Talk to himself, make a man. But it's light, then life. But in John's recounting, verse 4, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. So for John, it's backwards. And I don't think this is a coincidence or an accident. Genesis, let there be light. Here comes life. So it's like light, then life. For John, there was always life, and life becomes light. So here's how John views creation. He says in God's economy, God's always been. He's always had meaning. He's always had purpose. He's always existed. When he spoke light into the world, what he was really speaking is not just something to penetrate darkness, not just the opposite of the void. What he was really doing was speaking life into death. So for John, light becomes its own metaphor. It becomes the absolute opposite of darkness, or life, the opposite of death. So now everywhere light starts popping up in John, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, particularly Paul, New Testament's giving you a new way to look at light. It's not about you walk out of the room, you turn the lights off, the room becomes dark. You come in, you speak the word, the light comes on. For them, it's no longer about sunshine in the middle of darkness. It's about life in the middle of death. It's about identifying the areas of your life where there's darkness and there's turmoil, and then something coming into that darkness and that turmoil that turns the lights on. And so John has really kind of flipped creation on its head. And he said, it's not about that God said, let there be light, and then he brought life. No, God was always life, and out of his life comes light. And so wherever you put his life, you're going to put his light. Wherever you bring him into the midst, you're going to expel darkness. You're going to get rid of it. You're going to take it away. For John, he's really just building on a bunch of Old Testament messianic prophecies. And when you go read the Old Testament, here's a tip. The Old Testament is a book full of what appears to be antiquated ideas, hard to swallow concepts, principles of morality, a bunch of stuff happening in there that you don't see in the New Testament. You can get a little bit bogged down in the Old Testament. You need to start to read the Old Testament through the lens of go find Jesus. Because the New Testament is the culmination of everything the Old Testament is trying to tell you. And then here comes a man named Jesus. So if I were to ask you, who's the central figure of the Bible? Well, everybody would say Jesus. Yet Jesus doesn't show up until Matthew. That's 2/3 of the way through the book. So if you just started in Genesis tonight, you didn't know anything. You just picked your Bible up and started reading. You wouldn't even meet a man named Jesus until you got to the book of Matthew. So if you walk away from that session, let's say you could read that fast. So you sat down one day and you just start plowing from Genesis 1:1 and you just go. You don't get to Jesus until, 65, 70% through the book. And yet, the minute you see him and you start to digest him, you start to comprehend him, then if you started over, you would see Jesus in Genesis 1, and you would see Jesus in Genesis 2, and you would see Jesus in Genesis 3. You'd never see his name, but you'd see him everywhere. We're helped along with that, by stuff like John 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word is with God. What John is doing is saying, hey guys, when you go read the Old Testament, stop reading it for instructions on how to live. We're in a new covenant. Start reading it as a roadmap to Jesus. Start finding where Jesus exists in those pages. And then the Old Testament comes alive for you. So they're not just giving you a way to read it, they're giving you the interpretation of it. They're pulling out some of these gems out of the Old Testament, and they're laying them out in front of you. I just posted a message last week, 2 days ago, what angels desire to look into. And it's a message from 1 Peter where Peter says the prophets of old had talked about the grace that was to come, but not to come to them, but a grace that was to come to you, which is a phenomenal revelation that these guys get this stuff and they know it's not for their audience. That's got to be tough. That'd be like me standing in front of you tonight and saying, hey, I got a word, but it's not for any of you. In fact, it's not even for your kids or your grandkids. It might be for your 10th generation. But man, it's sort of like that line from Back to the Future where Marty McFly says, your kids are going to love it, about the rock music. Well, that's kind of what the Old Testament prophets were. They were looking at this grace going, well, this would be nice now, but man, your kids are going to love it because they get it. And so then we took you to Zechariah and we went grace, grace, grace. And if you just read Zechariah the first time, maybe you miss it. I mean, how could you find Jesus in there? When you get to the other side of the resurrection, the tomb's empty, and Jesus is ascended into heaven and now living inside of you, you go, I see Jesus there. Okay, so when the New Testament writers start penning the New Testament, they're able to dig back and to grab that Old Testament stuff and come drag it into the world in which they live and go, hey, I think this was talking about Jesus.